An economical table of 3 rat tribes. Chapter 1. Old Deuteronomy's Colony. Before there were tolls, there were tunnels, and before there was Maximus, there was old Deuteronomy. In the early days of the tunnels, there were no walls, no tolls, no border guards sniffing each pore. There were only rats, giant pack and field, and the constant low rumble of fear above. The fear had a name, Tommy, the cat who prowled the open lands. Tommy didn't trade. Tommy didn't speak. Tommy waited, and when the rats forgot him, he reminded them, with claws. That's why the tunnels mattered. Old Deuteronomy, the eldest of the giant rats, didn't rule with teeth or noise. He ruled by remembering and by building. His gift wasn't muscle. It was design. He studied the paths of air, the hollows where sound travelled, the vibrations of danger. He watched how the field rats darted, how the pack rats carried food, and how Tommy's paws stopped just short of certain shadows. That's where he laid the tunnels. And when he was done, he said, "Let no toll be taken here. These tunnels belong to the colony." Every year on the coldest night, the rats still gather in the Hall of Earth, deep below the oldest root system. Even now, long after his death, the rats take off their hats. They bow. They close their eyes. They remember. Some remember old Deuteronomy's bravery, how he once stood alone in the outer burrow and stared Tommy down long enough for 100 pups to escape. Others remember his wisdom, the way he could look at a single crack in a wall and know what kind of winter was coming. The way he said, "Tunnels are not just passageways, they are promises." In those days, the field rats could dart through the tunnels without fear. They couldn't run far, but they moved with purpose. They patched leaks, they cleared debris, they repaired the narrow crawlways where no giant rat could reach. They did the work no one noticed, but everyone relied on, and for that they were seen. They whispered to each other, "He sees us," and they believed it. The pack rats brought food from distant foraging paths, grain, dried roots, metal bits, and traded freely. They ran fast, gathered much, and always returned. They weren't fighters, but they were tireless. They grew strong, but not proud. They knew the tunnels were a gift, not a guarantee. And the giant rats? They kept the lights glowing in the central chamber. They dug the deepest paths. They defended the colony not with tolls, but with trust. It wasn't perfect. Rats still bickered, deals still broke, but the floor was stable. The scent of shared memory was strong. Old Deuteronomy didn't shout. He didn't hoard. He simply reminded the colony, over and over again, "You are not each other's enemy. The enemy is the thing that doesn't trade. The enemy is the silence above." And the rats nodded, even the loud ones. Because back then, even the strongest rat remembered the sound of claws on stone. Chapter 2. The Rise of Maximus. Not every tunnel leads forward. Some just echo louder. Maximus never cared for promises. He cared for applause. Maximus wasn't chosen for his wisdom. He didn't remember the scent trails of history. He didn't study airflow or architecture or the sound of claws on stone. He was chosen because he was loud, and because he made other giant rats believe the system had turned against them. "The tunnels are rigged," Maximus shouted. "The pack rats grow fat running routes we don't control. The field rats patch only what suits them, then scurry back to safety. We, the giant rats, built these tunnels, dug the deepest paths, kept Tommy at bay. And what do we get? Nothing but disrespect. They should be sending tribute. They should pay for our protection. We owe them nothing. They owe us everything." Maximus didn't offer tunnels. He offered doubt. He made rats question the soil beneath their paws. Not with facts, but with friction. He made them feel strong again, or at least angry enough to forget feeling weak. Some cheered not because they believed he would build better tunnels, but because they were tired of feeling small and tired of being patient. Maximus gave them noise to fill the silence of their fear. He claimed to fight for the giant rats. He howled for their pride. He growled about the burden they carried. But behind the curtain, he cared only for the roar of the crowd. "I'm the only one who dares say it," he'd shout. "I see things clearly. The rest of them are blind." And the louder he got, the more rats mistook his noise for truth, his vanity for vision, his polish for power. Some rats scoffed. Some shook their heads and whispered, "He's no builder." But others, Many others admired him, not because he brought food, not because he fixed anything, but because he disrupted. He poked at the old systems. He tore down maps and scratched new ones in the dirt. He laughed at the careful ways of old Deuteronomy and called them soft. There were rats who had long grown tired of caution, tired of steady lights and quiet rules, tired of listening to elders warn of Tommy, whom they had never seen. Maximus offered something else: excitement, movement, sound. Not safety, but sensation. He strutted into the Hall of Earth not with a blueprint, but with a torch. He lit the old scrolls and shouted, "We don't need the past, we need control." And many cheered, not all, but enough. The field rats glanced at each other, the pack rats tightened their food sacks, and deep in the roots a few old ones sighed. But the flares were too bright, the tunnel walls echoed too loud, and Maximus rose. The colony had chosen noise over memory, power over promise, and the tunnels began to shift. Chapter 3. The Toll Booths and the First Crack in the Colony. Raise a toll, lose a trader. Raise 10 and the tunnels go silent. Old Deuteronomy. The toll booths appeared without warning. They weren't walls, not yet. Just stone arches flanked by giant rats, holding tablets, tokens, and polished teeth. A pack rat from the eastern route arrived with 3 sacks of dried moss and a coil of woven vine. He paused at the checkpoint, as tradition dictated. 1 sack, freely given, always opened the path. The giant rat blocking the tunnel sniffed at the offering and said, "Not enough. New rules, new dues." The pack rat stood quietly. He adjusted the weight on his back. He did not beg. He did not barter. He simply turned, and with the coil of woven vine balanced against his side, he stepped into a darker, longer tunnel. Trade still intact, but headed somewhere else. Above the checkpoint, wedged into a ceiling crack, a field rat watched. She had patched that same ceiling last season. Watched the walls hold through winter. Watched pups pass under it safely. Now she saw a toll post where there had once been an open crossing. She didn't carry sacks. She didn't trade. But she took note. When she returned to her list of tunnels needing repair, she scratched that route off. Not out of rebellion, out of realism. Why patch what they no longer share? Maximus called it fairness. If they want to use our tunnels, he growled from the centre chamber, then let them show respect. We've carried the colony for too long. Now they pay. The giant rats roared in agreement. They nodded at toll booths like they were victories. But fewer pack rats passed through, and the tunnels grew quieter. The field rats kept working, but not everywhere. Cracks near the tolls were left untouched. Supports once reinforced with care were now simply noted and passed by. They didn't announce their decisions. They just made them. In some corners, pack rats gathered, not to plot but to plan. They began carving alternate routes, new tunnels, slower tunnels, but theirs. No announcements, no protests, just distance. And still Maximus spoke. We built this colony, let them show their gratitude, let them remember who kept Tommy at bay. But in places he did not walk, tunnels began to shift. Not from collapse, from choice. The first crack didn't split the tunnel, it split the silence. And as the tolls stayed, and the traders rerouted, and the repairs stopped, something else began to shift. The scent faded. The markers grew cold. The little stones once placed in corners, to say this tunnel is safe, this path is shared, this way is known, they no longer meant what they used to. The scent is fading, the rats whispered. It doesn't mean what it used to. Chapter 4. The early days of tolls had come. They taxed the routes, then wondered why no one came. Bitter giant rat reflection, overheard too late. The tunnels were still there, but something had shifted. There were fewer footsteps, fewer scent trails, fewer offerings placed at the old junctions where pack rats once exchanged goods and field rats once paused to inspect the walls. In the western forks a support beam collapsed. No one was hurt. But no one came to fix it, either. The field rats had been there the week before and walked past. Their ledgers were full and that tunnel had been marked. Subject to toll, let's stand. In the eastern loop a new branch appeared, low, narrow and unlit. Pack rats whispered about it near water wells, A trail only their kind knew, not yet taxed, not yet watched. It was slower, but it was theirs. One young pack rat, returning from it, set down his sack and said, "It's not faster, but no one asks how much I'm carrying." The older ones nodded. That was enough. One evening, near the base of the old tunnel spine, a young field rat stopped to drink from a cracked basin. Another figure padded up beside her, a small pack rat, tired, his fur brushed with clay. She glanced up. He shifted his load and said nothing. They drank in silence. Then, almost too softly to be heard, she said, "They stopped reinforcing this bend." The pack rat nodded. "We stopped using it anyway." No more words. Just a glance. Not quite friendship, but something close to understanding. Back in the central chamber, Maximus paced beneath the great root arch. He barked about tribute, about theft, about how the field rats had grown lazy and the pack rats disloyal. They want our tunnels, but they don't want to pay. They want our protection, but they mock our rules. But fewer giant rats were listening now. Their bellies were lighter. Their stores had not refilled. They'd chased away tribute. Now they were chasing crumbs. Later that week, in the upper den of the giant rats, the room grew restless. A younger giant rat stood near the back, his fur thinned by hunger, his eyes uncertain. "The tunnels are emptier," he said. "They're not bringing food. They're not even speaking." Another muttered, "The field rats stopped reinforcing the center beam." Maximus growled, "Let them. They'll crawl back when Tommy stirs." The first rat shook his head. "They're not afraid of Tommy anymore. They're tired of tolls." Maximus bared his teeth. They used to leave gifts without being asked. The room was quiet. Then an older voice from the shadows said, "Back then, they trusted us." That stopped even Maximus. Not rebellion. Not yet, but silence with weight. The kind that settles over a crumbling wall. Elsewhere, a small tunnel was being carved. It did not connect to Maximus's roads. No tolls were marked. No markers were laid. But as the earth shifted under the paws of the colony, a quiet truth began to settle like dust. The giant rats were still loud, but the rest of the colony was learning to live without them. Chapter 5. The Fork in the Tunnel. Tunnels don't end, they split. Pack rat proverb, passed in whispers. The toll booths still stood. Some rats still stopped at them, but most didn't. They'd found other ways. Some tunnels bent toward the far edges of the colony, where the walls were thinner and the air colder, but no tokens were demanded. Other paths curled through old forgotten burrows, repatched by field rats with no ledgers, no audience, and no thanks. One such tunnel ended in a wide clearing. New, rough walls, no central lights, but it was quiet, and it was theirs. A few field rats sat near a vent, passing down fibres to braid into baskets. 2 pack rats dozed near a damp moss pile. No tolls, no rules, just routine. One young rat, not quite of any tribe, looked up at the tunnel's edge and asked, "Who owns this?" A field rat glanced up. "No one." Then she smiled, just a little. "That's why it works." But the new tunnels came at a price. The paths were narrower now. The walls cracked in dry seasons. The old central routes had been faster, safer, stronger when they had been shared. But the rats accepted the trade. Freedom came with colder nights and longer journeys. They carried their loads a little heavier now, but they carried them for themselves. Back near the old chamber, Maximus still barked. "They'll come back," he roared. "When Tommy pounces, when the food runs out, they'll crawl back." But the chamber echoed differently now. Even his loudest declarations only reached a few arches deep. The rest of the tunnels bent away from him. They didn't defy. They just didn't return. Some giant rats remained near the old halls, gnawing scraps and waiting for the crowds to return. Others began to wander the edges of the tunnels, quieter than before. They had shouted for tolls. They had cheered for stronger walls. But the walls had cracked anyway. And their bellies had not filled. The tribute had not returned. Only the echoes of promises, louder once, thinner now. The scent stones at the colony's old centre were still there, but they were stale. Their messages faint. The scent of trust had faded, and new stones had not been laid. In time, the toll booths crumbled. No one knocked them down. They simply stopped being seen. What rose in their place was quieter. Tunnels that curved like questions. Paths walked without permission. Deals made without tribute. a colony without a centre. Far beyond the forks and the tolls, Tommy still prowled, silent, patient, waiting not for tribute but for weakness, and the cracks had started to show. But by then most rats had stopped looking back. They had chosen their tunnels, and they would choose them again. No one remembered when the fork had appeared, but they all remembered choosing, and far beneath the noise rats kept walking. A tunnel is not a deal, it is a direction shared, and when trust returns, so will the footsteps.